This is the chapter 33 video for Ecce Romani. It's going to cover the perfect passive participle, which we also call a blah 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 blah, for reasons which you will need to ask Doc Barry. And this is covered on pages 50 and 51 in your book, the Building the Meaning section. So here's a verb, voco, vocare, vocavi, vocatus, four principal parts, the first conjugation verb. And we've looked extensively at those first two principal parts, the present family, and we've looked in the perfect family a lot at that third principal part, vocavi. Now we're going to start looking more at this last principal part of a verb, vocatus. We are going to call that last principal part the perfect passive participle, or the PPP, or the blah 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 blah, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. Think about what that means, perfect passive participle. It's perfect because it's in the perfect family. It's passive because within that perfect family, the third principal part, vocavi, is active, and the fourth one is passive. And it's a participle for reasons we're going to see in a little bit. But to preview, hopefully you know that participles are verbal adjectives, and that's going to be pretty important in terms of what we're going to learn a little bit later. So again, perfect because it's from the perfect family, passive because it's the last principal part, and vocatus because of that us ending is an adjective ending, as in us, a, And again, that's since a participle is partially an adjective, that's important. We're going to translate this fourth principal part, the perfect passive participle, as having been something, and that's the standard basic way we can translate any perfect passive participle of any verb. So for this specific verb, voco, vocatus would be having been called. Here's a sentence. It's from chapter 33, line 26. Quoquus vocatus ab omnibus laudatus est. There, vocatus is our PPP, perfect passive participle. And we say they do a couple things. Number one, they modify nouns. In this sentence, vocatus is modifying quoquus. They both have that masculine nominative singular ending, us. That's going to be important. We also say that the action of a perfect passive participle, since it's a verb, of course, it has to have an action. That action takes place before the action of the main verb. So the action of the perfect passive participle happens first, and then the action of the main verb happens. This is important by way of saying that the perfect passive participle cannot be the main verb of a sentence. I'll repeat that. A perfect passive participle cannot be the main verb of a sentence. There has to be some other main verb. In this sentence, it's laudatus est, and we'll see how to translate that in just a second. So again, perfect passive participle takes place before the action of the main verb, and it modifies a noun. In this sentence, vocatus is modifying that noun, quoquus. So let's look at how we translate this. Here's our sentence again. Quoquus vocatus ab omnibus laudatus est. The most standard way we can translate that is the cook, having been summoned, or called, was praised by everyone. So like we just said, vocatus modifies quoquus, so it is the cook that is the person having been summoned, having been called, but the main verb here is laudatus est, the combo, perfect passive verb. So the cook was praised, and ab omnibus is an ablative of agent. He was praised by everyone, having been summoned. That's not the only way we can translate this sentence. There are other ways we could do it too. For example, we could say, after being summoned, the cook was praised by everyone. When summoned, the cook was praised by everyone. When the cook had been summoned, he was praised by everyone. The cook was summoned and praised by everyone. In any of those five sentences, we basically have the same thing going on. First, the cook is the one that was summoned, so there's the agreement that we talked about. And in all of those sentences, the summoning happens before the praising. And again, we also mentioned that. The action of this perfect passive participle, vocatus, happens before the action of the main verb, laudatus est. To look at this a little more in depth, again, this verb voco, vocare, vocavi, vocatus, we really want to think of that us ending as being us a 2-1-2 adjective, us a because that us is interchangeable for any of those endings. So that second bullet point there, it has the endings of a 2-1-2 adjective, and it must agree with the noun it modifies in gender and number and case. That's what adjectives do. And a participle is partially an adjective. It's a verbal adjective. So there's the action that we talked about, and also this agreement of an adjective. And what's it going to agree in? Gender, number, case. Therefore, any of those 2-1-2 endings are fair game to go on the end of the fourth principal part, the perfect passive participle, so that it agrees in the sentence and that it makes sense. Let's try another example. This is from exercise 33b. It's the first sentence, and it reads, Convivi ad caenam invitati a Cornelio ipso comiter salutati sunt. So the first thing we should probably do is find our perfect passive participle, our blah, 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 blah. It's invitati. Then we should probably figure out, okay, what is this agreeing with? Here it's convivi. Why? Because both of those are plural, both of those are masculine, and both of those are nominative. Invitati is from invito, invitare, invitavi, invitatus, which means invite. So we can see where knowing all four principal parts of a verb is obviously very important. If we don't know that invitatus comes from invito and it means invite, then things are going to be a lot more difficult for us. So invitati is having been invited, but we need to figure out what that is agreeing with. Who is it that is having been invited? Well, we said it's convivi, the guests, because both of those are the same gender number and case. Don't forget, convivi is masculine. So we would say the guests having been invited. Since ad caenam is between convivi and invitati, we want to take all of those words as one chunk. So that then becomes the guests having been invited to dinner. That's how we're going to start this sentence. The subject of the entire sentence is convivi, guests. And since that's the subject, we need to find the main verb. Remember, invitati, not the main verb. Instead, the main verb is salutati sunt. It's a combo. It's perfect passive. So the guests were greeted. That's how that's going to be taken. And they were greeted comiter, graciously. Who were they greeted by? Since salutati sunt is passive, we need some ablative of agent. By Cornelio ipso, by Cornelius himself. So putting the whole thing together, we would say the guests, having been invited to dinner, were graciously greeted by Cornelius himself. So we can see there again, like we mentioned, this perfect passive participle invitati agrees with convivi, it modifies it, and that action takes place before salutati sunt. They have to be invited to dinner before they can be greeted at the dinner. That makes sense, doesn't it? So one more time. The guests, having been invited to dinner, were graciously greeted by Cornelius himself. So, hopefully that made sense. If not, go back and take a look at it again. For more practice, I would continue exercise 33b on page 51. See you next time.